Chapter 11. As she entered Wickborough, Hannah noticed a disturbing silence. No one was visible, but she could feel many eyes watching her from their houses. She ran her hand through her hair, took a deep breath, and did her best to abandon any insecurities she had. Out of breath, Hannah stopped running and began to walk at a fast pace, a growing pain in her side. The smoke continued to rise in the center of town, though she was no longer able to see the colors reflecting off the smoke. Hannah imagined Seer and Hexfer, the sorcerer in the emerald cloak, fighting one another with a wave of spells. She wondered what the explosions came from. Was that a form of magic, or did it have to do with the clouded sphere Seer had taken with him? Concentrating on the concrete streets beneath her feet, spotted with blood every so often, Hannah's thoughts slowed. She felt control and rationale returning to her. She chuckled as she thought of how Nina would enjoy this exciting, yet frightening, situation. But Nina would not have been afraid. She would handle the situation as if she had nothing to fear, as if the opposition should be the ones fearing her. Hannah prayed Nina was okay. An unnecessary guilt began to form, Hannah forcing herself to stay focused. She made a promise to herself that, when this was all over, she would find Nina. She would make certain Nina was safe and healthy, and they would laugh about all of this as if there was something funny to laugh about. They would be friends again. Hannah knew it. Hannah rounded the corner and found the center of the action. The black smoke rose from a singular point. At the base of the smoke was a dome shape composed of a dense smog. Red and green lit up the smog from the inside. Hannah knew Seer was within. She cautiously approached the dome, looking around to ensure no one was watching her. After not seeing anyone, she stepped through the smog, only to discover the inside was hollow. The second thing she noticed was the cause of the black smoke, the Empyrean orb. However, the first thing she noticed was what she had most expected, Seer and Hexfer. They were battling one another, not with words, but with force. Although, when she entered, that changed. An odd sensation coursed through Hannah, her nerves beginning to take over. "How nice of you to join us, your majesty," Hexfer said with a devious grin and a bow. His green cloak lay on the ground, and his silver hair hung unkempt about his face, several strands leaving the braid. "Hannah," Seer mumbled, his voice trembling, "you shouldn't have come." Hannah's eyes widened as she looked at Seer. He was bleeding from cuts on his face and arms, his quilted tunic and leggings ripped in places. His ruby cloak lay on the ground near the burlap sack. He looked worn and exhausted. Hexfer smiled as he observed Hannah and her expression. He gazed at Seer and laughed, a haunting, malicious laugh. "He may not be as charming as your prince," Hexfer directed at Hannah, "and his brain may not contain as much knowledge, but his heart," Hexfer's voice feigning sympathy. He motioned his hand to the ground, Seer unwillingly mirroring the movements. "His heart is so much larger, much less corrupt." Seer coughed out blood and shook his head. As he raised his face, Hannah was shocked to see a grin, a soothing grin, to prove he was not fazed by the games Hexfer played. "Hexfer, it is rude to speak ill of a man to his soon-to-be betrothed," Seer stated. He rose to his feet, still appearing off balance. "It's sad, isn't it?" Hexfer said, continuing to address Hannah. "When a person becomes overconfident in their abilities only to fail, should we feel sympathy toward them? Or should we simply hope they'll learn their lesson?" He chuckled. "I apologize. It's quite rude of me to ask such unnecessary questions. Here's one I deem to be quite necessary, and I assure you Seer would agree with me. How do you feel about sorcerers?" Hannah blankly stared at Hexfer. His presence was intimidating and hostile. She felt any answer may put her at risk, but not her alone, Seer as well. She was unaware how she should approach the question. Hexfer understood her hesitation and chuckled once more. "Perhaps the question was too vague," he stated. "I'll ask an easier one that not even your simple mind should have trouble answering. Do you hate me?" He asked the question with a smirk. Hannah glared at him, though she quickly turned her gaze to the ground. She was angry, certainly, and perhaps full of rage and fear, but the term hate seemed inaccurate for her feelings toward him. She felt so many emotions in that moment she had trouble deciphering them. Hexfer appeared displeased. He shook his head and sighed. It seems your mind is too simple for any question. That's probably why the prince has chosen you to be the queen, because you won't be too much of a nuisance to control. I understand why you're angry, Hannah murmured, her voice shaking. She stared at the ground, unable to connect eyes with Hexfer while she spoke. What could you possibly understand, your majesty? Hexfer spitefully questioned. Hannah's eyes met his, but he quickly moved them to the ground. He took a deep breath and started to laugh. Angry? You think I'm angry? Do I look angry, your majesty? Is this what true anger and rage and hatred look like? Hexfer, stop taunting the lady. She's done no wrong to you or any sorcerer for that matter. I'm amused is all. If one continues to be angry even after an act of revenge or intimidation, I should feel they may have issues inventing aggression. Innocents are dying. How could I be angry? Hexfer asked with a large smile on his face. His emerald ring illuminated brighter as he spoke, the intensity of his emotions visible. His cold green eyes connected with Seer's warm amber eyes. But you're angry, aren't you, Seer? Hexfer's question was rhetorical, for they both knew the answer. The powers of a sorcerer were never meant to be used in such ways, Seer retorted. His deep voice resonated with his rage, sending a chill up Hannah's spine. Blood dripped from his nose into the ground. He was infected. Who are you to decide how others use their abilities? You sound like those who oppress us. Seer coughed and fell to his knees. Blood splattered his hands in the ground. His ruby ring appeared dim, as if the stone in it had lost its life. The Empyrean orb produced a whirring sound before breaking apart and slowly disintegrating. A cyclone of air stormed within the circle of smog. Hannah covered her ears, for the pressure was causing her pain. Hexfer looked around in irritation laced with fear, catching his cloak in his hand as it started to fly past him. Seer could do nothing but lay on the ground, powerless to do anything but cough. The smog cleared in an instant. Hannah observed the clear sky above. No signs of smoke or clouds could be found. The day was sunny and bright, as if no catastrophic event had taken place. Hannah looked to Hexfer, but his expression was enough to tell her that he was not responsible for what had occurred. Hexfer's pout transformed into a grin. Hannah first thought he was looking at her, but realized he looked past her. She slowly turned her head. Not far behind her stood a figure wearing an onyx-colored cloak. It is done, he spoke in a forcibly altered voice. His face was hidden in a thick shadow under his hood. Hannah stared at him, thinking he looked like a shadow more so than a human being. The figure looked to Hannah, sending a chill up her spine. She stood frozen, not knowing what to do. She wished to help Seer, but she wondered what would happen if she were to move. Her mind wanted one thing, and her heart wanted another. However, her body left her no choice. She was frozen. I've spoken to the royal advisor. He said he would compromise with the United Courts of Kings on the amendment. The prince has been informed of our requests, whether they are in accordance with the terms of the amendment or not. The onyx sorcerer explained. Hexfer licked his lips and squinted his eyes. He glanced in the direction of the castle before returning his eyes to the shadowy character. It's not quite the satisfying victory I expected. They gave up too easily. They didn't even send their knights to scare us into complying with their demands, Hexfer complained, as if disappointed with the lack of opposition. Did you and the advisor discuss the articles up for compromise? Perhaps this is not the place to discuss. Hannah felt his eyes return to her. The mystery about who may be under the cloak filled her head. Why did he choose to hide his face, alter his voice? The onyx sorcerer's words were not of threats nor of further attacks, but of diplomacy. Hannah wondered. His presence was not hostile like Hexfer's, their alliance all the more confusing to Hannah. Of course, Hexfer responded, wrapping his cloak about him. The guild will want to hear about it straight away, though I'll have to think of a clever tale if they are to believe I convinced the royal advisor to compromise. You've had no trouble in weaving tales before. Hexfer laughed. I suppose you're right. Hexfer walked past Hannah to reach the onyx-cloaked sorcerer. Hannah felt another chill course through her body. Before they turned to walk away, the man in the onyx cloak bowed. May you prosper as the queen, your majesty, and perhaps one day we will be able to discuss much in a different light, as allies in arms. Hannah thought she heard his unaltered voice for a moment, the sound familiar to her ears. She did not know whether it was her mind giving up after a long day, but the longer she gazed at him, the more she felt as if they were similar. Though he was a sorcerer, he was no less human than she was. Perhaps that was the similarity she sensed, but she couldn't help but feel there was more. Hexfer half turned and gave a lazy bow in Hannah's direction. She was surprised by his attempt, no matter how forced it appeared. The two sorcerers turned their backs to her and took a few steps before disappearing. Hannah stared at the spot for a second before her thoughts caught up to her. She heard his cough and ran to see her.